Hello, this is Jed Brewer with Study Groups and the Below the Line Club. Appreciate you being on the call today to talk about food service. And the point that we're going to make is food service is harder than you think, but we're really fortunate to have three food service experts to help guide us through the complications that food service provides. So really pleased that Mike Lashy with Paragon Solutions will be on the call. They're a design company, and also with Brad Dusler of Food Concepts out of Madison, Wisconsin area. Will also be on the call, and then Mark Molter with Applied Data Corp. So we're real excited for these three individuals and appreciate you being on the call. We'll get right into it, but before we do, we want to make this as interactive as possible, but with that said, I have the audience muted to avoid background distraction and noise that would otherwise be picked up. But if you have a question, what I'd like you to do is to type in the GoToWebinar framework. There's a little place you can type your question in. That'll get relayed to me, and then I will be able to relay that onto the presenters at the appropriate time. Format here today, I've asked each of these three individuals to share 5 best ideas related to food service from their perspective. So we'll spend the first half of this call with Mike, Brad, and Mark sharing their 5 best ideas. Then we'll spend the second half of the call more with panel open discussion where we have some questions, either your questions that you've asked or some questions that I may have to talk more about food service and how we can make it a little easier than what it is. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right in. And Mike, I'm going to start with you and allow you the opportunity at the Paragon Solutions to share your 5 big ideas.
Well, I appreciate it, Jed, and thanks for letting me go first. I'd hate to have to follow the other 2 guys because they're good. But let me cue it up this way. When we started talking about this presentation and the topic came up, harder than you think, I go back to all the customers that we have, and they're always looking for the easy button. They're always looking for that silver bullet when it comes to food service. And I keep trying to tell them there isn't any. It's a process, and it's something that when you take shortcuts, inevitably you don't realize the maximum potential. So, some of the things that we talk about continuously is that process in selecting your brand and making the right choice for your food service, and then finally getting to what that presentation is going to be and what the functional design is going to be. So at this point, I want to say that there's 3 C's that I say at the very beginning. When you're building the foundation of a good food service program, you have to first explore the competency within your company. What are you really capable of doing? Second is you have to explore the customer base on each individual location. And finally, you've got to look at the competition on each individual location. And what you're going to find is there is no single solution. You go to these trade shows and you see the kiosks of a pizza here and a chicken there, and they all say all you have to do is put this kiosk in your store and you're going to make millions. Well, it's not that easy. It's just not that easy. So if you go to the next slide, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share with you the stories behind a couple of different projects that we were fortunate enough to work on. The first one is Slovacek's out of West Texas. And when I talk about the 3 C's, the competency, the customer base, and the competition, West Texas is known for their Czech population, so it's a very unique demographic. And so the choice here, what they explored, because they did have the competency to do full bakery, and Slovacek's originally was a meat, and still is actually, a meat company. So they have the market, and they have the bakery, and that's their core competency. The natural extension of that was the barbecue. So they used that foundation to build out this Slovacek's brand and to create a very, very unique proprietary when when they were done, you know, the results of this particular store, I can't share the numbers, but it's incredible. If you ever get the opportunity going down 35W south of Fort Worth to stop into Slovacek's, you won't be disappointed. Very creative, very innovative, and really capitalized on a very unique situation. Of the 4 projects that I'm going to share with, each one of them, we actually have done videos where we've interviewed the customers and gotten their perspectives on, you know, how they came up to this solution and where they developed their programs. And so I'm going to get the links to those 4 videos to Jed. If anyone is interested afterward, and actually we'll probably just have them send it out to y'all if you're interested. In each case, we're interviewing the owners, and they're sharing kind of the secrets behind the curtain. But in the key, again, is there's no silver bullet. You go through this process to develop something that's unique. So in the Slovacek's case, the uniqueness was capitalizing on the Czech population, on the commuters going between Fort Worth and Austin, going to TCU games or Texas games or A&M games or whatever. So this was a very, very unique project. So in this particular case, going with the big brand made no sense at all. This draws more than, say, if you would have put a Wendy's or something else on, because it really capitalized on that unique heritage. The next project, however, is completely different in many ways. And if you flip the slide, Jed, I don't know if I'm lagging behind or, there you go. Q-Mart's out of Houston and Austin area. And Q-Mart is a well-established brand where they actually embrace, in some cases, they have Burger Kings, they have churches, they have a lot of different options where they are the franchisee. But in this particular case, what they were looking for is that next alternative. So on the location that you're looking right here, there actually is a Burger King attached to this convenience store, but they were looking for not only a different product line, but something that would take care of that local customer that was looking for high quality food, and that's not a brand. So we developed the brand, the Q. So a lot of times people will put their own proprietary food in, but not take the time to develop a brand. So the key element here is take the time to develop a brand that becomes recognizable and take that brand throughout the entire store. You'll see the Q on not only the order kiosks, but in the menu systems, identified in all of the packaging throughout the store. So it really looks like a national brand, and there's a chain of 15, 20 stores. So you can capitalize on the whole idea of being a brand and still not be a huge location. So in the case of Slovacek's, it was capitalizing on Czech. In this case, it was creating a complementary program that takes from the major, in this case a Burger King, and allows you to do your own product. And it transitions to the grab and go. So in the video, what you'll see is it was very unique kitchen setup, a very unique functional setup to accomplish the goals that Q-Mart had from the very beginning. So once you understand the 3 C's, then you've got to develop the specifics of the location, develop the brand or proprietary brand, and come up with what that menu selection is going to be. The third location that I'm going to share, that again is unique in many ways, there's a little lag, there you go. Bighorn Travel Plaza is located in Fort Worth, Texas. They're on the interstate. So what they were trying to do here was to capitalize on brand. So their selection process, understanding what their competency was. They are the franchisee of Dunkin' Donuts, Taco Bueno, and they still saw the need for that proprietary food. So you see right there the Bighorn Grill. Bringing them all together attracts the people coming off the interstate looking for that recognizable brand in Taco Bueno. Certainly the morning traffic is driven to the Dunkin' Donuts and then some. But they wanted to capitalize on their food service experience, on their own competency, and take care of that local customer that understands you can get a heck of a burger at Bighorn Grill. So it really takes advantage of all the customers, the customer opportunities. And so the solutions, what I'm driving at so far in these three things, is there's three different solutions. There is no silver bullet. There is no easy button. It's understanding what the differences are. The final one that I'm going to share with you is actually a truck stop by the name of Hat 6 out in Casper, Wyoming. Again, they're trying to capitalize on being on the interstate and having, interstate traffic going back and forth. So bringing in the brands like Schlotzsky's, Cinnabon, and Moe's was very important to drive that traffic. It also accomplished the goal of having multiple day parts because those truckers are going 24/7. And so it really took care of a good share of that. And a lot of people would, just call it a day and say, boy, that's great, but they didn't. They have what they call a Cowboy Deli that really does as much as any of the other three franchises. They, again, are the franchisee, but they use that food service experience to develop the Cowboy Deli with their own proprietary menus there. So they'll do burritos, hamburgers, all kinds of things in the Cowboy Deli, in addition to the Moe's, Schlotzsky's, and the Cinnabon. So the challenge that I'm putting to each one of you is to not take the easy way out, but to analyze from the very beginning what your core competency is, what your unique customer needs are, and then evaluating the competition, the 3 C's. Once you understand that, then move to the next step, which is either building your own brand or selecting a brand. If you jump to selecting a brand or building your own brand, I hear things like they've chosen a chicken menu, and I ask them, why did you pick that? Well, I like chicken. That's probably the worst reason in the world to select a chicken franchise or a license agreement or whatever. It's understanding your customers and understanding what they need. So once you understand the 3 C's, then you build your brand. Finally, you get around to the things that we do, which is the design, the functionality, the flow, all of those things. And too many times people jump the gun and they go right to the end game. And like the title says, it's a lot harder than you think, but with the right analysis and the right help, you can get there. So with that, I'm going to pass the torch to...
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, to Brad Dusler at Food Concepts. Thank you, Mike. One quick question. You talked about the 3 C's: competency, customer base, and competition, and understanding each of those. If you have a chain of stores and you're trying to develop a food program, I could see your competency being the same as a company, but your sites can be located in different markets with different customer bases and specific markets and different degrees of competition. Are you saying then that your food program will be highly unique to the various stores as opposed to a consistent offering across your chain?
I think, yes. What I'm saying is that they should not all be the same, but they can have similar components, or some of the components might transition through all stores. Take the Q, for example. They have Burger King in one, Church's in another, Subway in a third. But throughout them, they have the Q, which is their taco program, which is the tie that binds. So in that way, you're bringing your own brand recognition to each store, but you're understanding the fact that your customer base and needs are different in every store and offering them what's going to give you the best chance to succeed in food service. There is no one answer to all of it. And I think flexibility in menu and delivery is important, but you can still be consistent in your brand and in your execution.
All right, thank you, Mike. Brad, let's turn over to you at Food Concepts and step us through your big ideas.
Great, thank you. Well, at Food Concepts, we design and build food merchandisers, carts, kiosks, countertop solutions, and occasionally some full interior food service executions and things. I thought I'd start off by talking about an array of considerations and things to think about before implementing a food service program. And if you're already in one and a veteran of the food service world, you can at least think about some of these, and maybe you'll be nodding your head yes, as you can relate. First one is capital. You really need to think about what kind of capital investment you're going to make. It can range from a few $1,000s for a countertop solution to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you're putting a large QSR with a drive-through in like a McDonald's, you may be upwards of $1 million pretty easily. So it could be an expensive venture. Operational commitment from top down. I know that's one of the things Mike mentioned, but you really need to make sure that your organization is passionate and believes in food service. It's a little different way of life. Some people are cut out for it, some aren't. But you really need to have that commitment from upper level management all the way through your operational systems. Space allocation is critical for both merchandising and decor. How much of your store do you want to dedicate to food service? Important consideration. Employee headcount and training programs. Another important consideration, some of these QSR kinds of programs can have upward of adding, 20 or 30 employees to a payroll, sometimes more. Cost versus retail accounting, and Mark might get into that a little bit, but prior to Food Concepts, I was the director of food service for PDQ Food Stores and brought food service into that organization and had interesting learning converting from retail accounting over to blended retail and cost accounting. Food safety, obviously, is talked about a lot. Been a lot of recent outbreaks of some supply chain issues related to melons and lettuce and things like that. But you really need to think about sanitation certification and training. And many states, it's a requirement. So that can, at least the store manager at some level has to be certified in safe food practices. Parking, customers and employees, as I mentioned, if you have adding 20 employees to your staff, they got to have a place to park. You need to think that through. Supply chain capabilities. So if you're working with a candy tobacco supplier, they may not be very familiar or deep into food service, so you may need to add a food service distributor to your program if you're getting into fresh prepared especially. Storage is an important consideration. Frozen, refrigerated, and dry all expand exponentially as you venture farther and farther into food service. Marketing plan, advertising, signage, and promotion for your proprietary brands, your food manufacturer brands, or franchise programs all require advanced planning for marketing and advertising. Full service versus self-service and labor availability. Today is a tight labor market, so another consideration to think through. You can go to the next slide. I'm going to talk now about an umbrella program, and what we really like to do is have retailers think about, and I think Mike was headed down this path as well, but retailers should really be managing a portfolio of 3 types of brands. There's proprietary brands, the brands that you would create, own and develop on your own. Food manufacturer brands, which is a great way to get into some branding and national advertising for some consumer packaged goods without having to pay for the use of those brands. And then franchise brands, of course, and Mike showed a couple of in his photos of some of the work that they've done, but a lot of retailers are going down this path. Obviously, you pay the pros to get their expertise and learn from them and buy into their training programs and their marketing and ad campaigns. But it comes at a price, and but it draws traffic generally. So it's important to think about all 3 of those categories. The next slide, I've got just a few examples of each of those to give you a little flavor of what some of those look like. Many of those I'm sure you've seen and or heard of. So in the franchise brand category, Subway and Dunkin' are doing quite a bit in the industry. Cinnabon, which Mike mentioned, but there's a host of some of these that have touched these stores. Proprietary brands, some of those categories like frozen beverage is a great example. Slurpee has a great national reputation as being probably one of the most recognized brands in the area of frozen beverage. But there's a few other, there's Circle K's Polar Pop and Simply Great Coffee are part of their program. And then under manufactured brands, You see some of those roller grill brands and some other categories where when you think about those categories, typically you think of food manufacturer brands more than you think of a franchise or a proprietary brand. So just some ideas on mixing that. And again, our thought is that each retailer should be managing and developing and building a portfolio of these brands and then implementing them, as Mike said, through proper diagnostics for each of the locations. So at the idea there is at a base level, you may carry some of the brands in 100% of your stores, like the bottom of the pyramid here. And then maybe 70% of your stores, you might add roller grill and pizza and maybe a sandwich program. And then maybe in 10% of your stores, you might get into the franchise concepts and add things like Subway and Dunkin'. Obviously, if you have Subway in your program, you're probably not going to be doing Hillshire made-to-order sandwiches. You're going to have a clause in the contract that's not going to allow you to do both of those at the same time. But so you have to work through those. But the point of this is, as you work up that pyramid, you get deeper into restaurant kinds of operations. The challenges get a little bigger. Increase in space and labor costs go up, and it's just an important thing for you to consider when you're doing your budgeting and training. A lot of people like to start in some of those base categories and evolve as they go through time up this pyramid as well. So the next slide will give you some tips and some things to think about related to your brand portfolio and how you manage that. So these are just some additional tips. Always be searching to expand your brands in the portfolio. It's a living kind of a process. You want to be adding and taking away the ones that aren't performing well for you over time. And if they're your proprietary brands, you need to own them, much like raising a child. And you got to be responsible for them all the way through adulthood. And it's important to be thinking about how to manage those. Start with the basics and then build toward proprietary, which is the path we see most people take over time as they get a little more brave, and investment spend there. Go to school on the franchise brands and learn from the best. When you pay a fee to work with those pros, the better food service operators we've worked with in the industry have had people go through Subway school and a Hamburger University and that kind of thing, and they learn a lot about operational training in marketing and advertising and how to manage for growth. Put the right brands in the right locations, and Mike talked about that quite a bit. It's part of that site analysis, looking at the competitive set in a trade area and a primary, secondary, and tertiary area of a location. And so it's important that you put the right brand set in the right locations. 3 ways to grow sales: increasing average check, increasing frequency of visits, and attracting new customers. And your marketing plans and your strategies should speak to all 3 of those. They're all 3 great growth avenues, but it's important to do each of those. Trend toward fresh, prepared, and fresh condiments. Big trend that we're seeing right now, and so something to think about. Be prepared to invest in your proprietary brands like a franchise. So just because you're not paying the franchise, say it's a 10% fee, you should still think and plan to investment spend those kinds of dollars against your own proprietary brand, both in terms of training and advertising and a marketing plan. Invest in your restrooms and keep them clean. If you're going to get into food service, it's a really smart thing to upscale your restrooms and make sure you've got strong protocols on managing those for cleanliness. That's the primary marker for your cleanliness facing the customer, so real critical. Investment spend and plan for waste. Anybody that targets zero waste is not thinking about it right, so it's really important that you plan and invest and spend in the area of waste. Make sure you plan and publish a marketing calendar throughout the year, whether it's an LTO or seasonal promotions and that kind of thing. It's important to do that. And then keep in mind your food service program will define your store and your personality. Outside of food service, our industry's pretty much got the same products, and they might display them a little differently and have a few more cooler doors or put their candy in a different aisle, but what really differentiates one of us from another is our food service programs. That's all I've got.
All right, thank you, Brad. Really appreciate that and the ideas that you shared there. Let's turn quickly to Mark Moulter at Applied Data Corp. And Mark will allow you to share your 5 big ideas. And then after that, move into Q&A time.
Oh, thank you very much, Jed. A little bit about ADC. ADC is a systems company that grew up in food. So for the last 30 years, that's all we ever focused on were opportunities that were found in the production of food, labeling, everything to do with manufacturing food. We work with traditional grocers as well as C-stores and some restaurants today. We're seeing more and more growth in the C-store area. That's why we've gotten involved with groups like Jed's here, and have seen some real gains. And with our clients, we've been able to kind of shortcut some of the learning curves that we've learned over the years and some of the pitfalls. So Jed, if you want to go to the next slide. One of the key differentiating ideas that is being driven in the marketplace is our ability to have our own unique brand. If you think of where you're trying to take convenience stores to with food, it's all about being unique. It's all about getting someone to come in and selling that image, and that image has a lot to do with what I have up on the screen now, which is optimized shrink is good. If you think about when you walk into a location that you really like and really selling the concept of food and eating and fresh, what is it that excites you with your eyes? It's the colors, it's the abundance. So we have retail partners all the time come to us and go, what should our shrink number be? And we go, well, it's different. It's different on every single category, and it's different on every single retailer. But shrink isn't bad. Shrink's a good thing. Without any shrink, you're guaranteed to have lost sales. And that's one of these paradigm shifts a lot of retailers have a problem with. Is you have to build into the plan a percent of sales that are going to be shrink. So that is, kind of a no-brainer when you think of it at this level. But when you start actually implementing and going, oh, I'm building out 10 of this and I know I'm going to throw 2 away, how do you control that? And that's really where, some electronic tools can come into play and guide users to better practices in those areas. And we've seen that performance can go way up so that you can offer more. So really building in that shrink is a good idea, and then contrasting it with something that's like, looking at, shrink versus sales. It's a real easy metric. A lot of our customers can use that information and use it to really guide to a higher profitability across the line. So don't be fearful of shrink. Just know how to measure it, and then reinvest in looking at it on a repeated basis. Best practice. Weekly, we have a report shipped out that says, here's what your store did, here's what your region did, and here's where you are. Look at your top 3 items as it relates sales to shrink, not gross shrink. And understand that, maybe we need to focus on a certain area and have good conversations about what happened. Far too often we're putting these programs together and we're just stacking it high and letting it fly, and then when shrink's a problem, we produce not enough. What that does is just infuse the shopper. Next slide, please.
Should be
The
pulling
next
up.
thing, excellent. The next slide that I have here is one that really is about something that I think a lot of retailers miss or have to go back to, and it's a very costly mistake, which is recipe management is foundational. I know menu labeling just came out last May or something like that, where people started to pay attention to, oh, I got to have my calorie counts and my nutritionals. But before that, it seemed to be, less of a I have to have and more of a nice to have. So it is a foundational piece, in my opinion. Here's why. If you think of what recipe management is without looking at the slide, you may think, oh, it's nutritionals or it's doing your cookbook. It could also be that you're not using it correctly, because it's also a reporting tool to understand my gross margins in real time. If I understand my costs and the cost of all the things that go into making my items are changing all the time. Having a systemic way of tracking that and knowing when things fall out of line is very much one of the top things that you can do to increase your profitability and make sure your program's successful. So you've taken all the time to build out your right display, taken all the time to build out the right store and look and feel and market it. But at the same time, if you're selling a ton of something and you're selling it at cost or a loss, there was no point in doing it. It's not a charity. And then being able to tie that into your production system and derive the nutrient data is also something that's never going to go away. So in a moment, I'm going to talk about who the shopper is and what they look like. We kind of touched on that when Brad talked about that a little bit, is kind of know who your audience is. Well, knowing who your audience is and knowing what nutritionals to surface, not surface, is done. You have to surface information. Everyone wants to experience food. Someone might be dieting, wants to know what the calorie count is. Someone might just want to know that the item doesn't have an allergen for their child. So having a recipe management system for that is just foundational. The last part of this is something that, again, is quite often overlooked, but as part of that brand and building it correctly, is consistency. So a good recipe management system will allow you to detail out every step in the process of putting together the item, whether it's just a breakfast sandwich, or we're taking the muffin, we're putting the 3 strips of bacon and the cheese and the egg on it, or we're having to heat those off for 30 seconds and then serve them. However those prep methods go and however it's supposed to look at the end need to be detailed. They need to be delivered. So when you look at best practices out there in the industry, you'll see that the major operators, McDonald's for one, you go to McDonald's, you're always going to get that same hamburger, whether you get a McDonald's hamburger here in Boston or you go to Ireland and get one, it's going to be the same McDonald's hamburger. And that consistency helps with food safety, it helps with costing, and it helps with building up your brand recognition. I know I can get this at your location and it's going to be consistent. Not, hey, I got the sandwich here, it's really good, and I go over here and it's really bad. So making sure that you can put out the standard, this is what I need you to build to employee, is part of that. And that's where recipe management is foundational. Next slide, please. So as we look at why we need to surface information and what we need to put out there, is really going to be driven by who the shopper is. So I go back to Mike's presentation when he's going through the various different setups. And the first one, the Czechoslovakian, population in Texas, that's great, and that does hone in on one population piece. If you look more to back up a bit and go, well, who's the shopper and who's most apt to come into my store? You start to get a clear picture too about, hey, if I just do something that hits this group, at least that has some mass appeal, regardless if they're Czech, Irish, or Russian. They're all going to appreciate certain things. So I look at the largest cohort out there, it's millennial, and when we look at that, we say, what do millennials want? And there's certain things they're looking for. First off, just understanding that they want a dynamic offering. So you really need a system that can evolve. That your brand can have those key stakeholding items, but around it, you need to change your offering and you need to mix it up. And it might be a seasonality change, and that you drive sales with this particular item and it's only seasonal. You see a lot of different restaurants do that. You see a lot of grocers do that as well. But it's also then the ability to execute to having this new item out there. So if you look at the picture there, I didn't choose this out of hand. I really thought, what is a millennial to me? Well, I look at my daughters and I go, yep, they love selfies, they love eating pizza, but they don't like just eating a plain old, cheese and pepperoni pizza. They want the, flatbread pizza. They want, basil on it and a white sauce and some mozzarella. It's more of the fresh, more bold. What millennials are doing is they're identifying themselves through the foods that they eat. So whether they know that or not, they identify and they go, oh yeah, bold and spicy and different and changing and evolving. That's me. that's the food I choose. So kind of understanding that when you look at your selection and you start to put systems together that can take something from concept out to rollout in store with profitability, food safety, and all requirements met, you have to really have a system to do that. The next area that I want to talk about is just go all in with fresh food. You know, again, this is an evolution of changing what people think about your locations. You know, if they're already going in for food, how do we make more of it? How do we make more money in it? Really, if you look at your own brand and your proprietary brand, if you will, it's one of the most profitable areas, right? What is it? So this was a NAC statistic, but I always found this really enlightening, is that, you know, majority of the profit is coming from in-store sales on food. And the foods are these prepared foods that come from food service. So if you think about how do I make something and how do I make it different, different may not be something that's a national brand, but that's something people trust. So you do have to have the mix of that. But it definitely comes with making your own brand and having your own items and being able to execute on it. So I can't say enough about go all in with food. Now, one final note is that with any system and with any process food service that you're putting in place, make sure that at the end of the day, the people in the location, the people producing it, are in love with what you're putting it in. This is a picture from a C-store location, and it was during a large rollout. We had to take a pause, but what was great about this is that it made the life easier of the person using it. They really viewed it as a tool. So when we talk about, oh, you got to track your shrink, you got to look at production plans. Why? So we track shrink so that the production plans are good. We use an electronic production planning system that delivers information right to your mobile units, so they like it and they can embrace it and they can understand it. And the information to them must be relevant. So making sure that it's making their lives easier. That we asked the people in this picture, why was it that this mattered so much to you, this technology change of going from paper-based card sheets and systems that just spit out what you did last year to using a system that told them what to do. And the reasoning behind it was, I get to just bake things, I get to make things, and I get to sell them. So they get to work with the customer and they get to interact. The technology is just a tool to be able to do that. But trying to do it without the tool means there's a lot of extra work involved. So making sure it's a tool is definitely a plus in production's eyes. So make sure you think of that when you're thinking of your overall solution. How do you build it out? Thank you very much, Jim.
Yeah, Mark, thank you. And for the audience, again, I encourage you to type in any questions, but want to turn to discussion here. Guys, so we started the conversation just saying food service, it's harder than you think. And why is it so hard? What's so hard about it? I heard Mike talk a little bit about there's no silver bullet, which is one of the things, but open it up to more elaboration on what it is that makes food service so difficult.
Well, Jim, I can start off on that one. I think that the biggest from system side of things and to be able to execute is that it is new discipline often that you have to have in place, and that could be a new employee role to make the plan, putting in your new food service plan a successful one. Someone who's watching things that maybe you haven't been watching before. So making sure that you staff up for this and that you give it, top-down eyes on will help the project, and we'll make sure that, if there is a problem, we visit it, we figure out what it is, and we revisit it again. And we keep making changes and adjust because it's got to be a dynamic program.
This is Brad. I had a memory when you asked that question when I was at PDQ. We put a food court in one of our pilot locations, and the veteran manager was in there, and he was a very successful manager, but he didn't do very well with the food court. And we went in, and I finally ended up taking him out to lunch, and I just said, what's going on? And he said, if I wanted to be in the restaurant business, I'd be in the restaurant business. He said, I'm in the C-store business, and I'm not sure I'm up for food service. And we moved him to another location and brought someone in who was passionate about it, and it took off. So it's one of the things I think makes it difficult is you got to have the right mindset of the right people that are passionate about food service. It's not for the faint of heart.
And I think this is Mike. If you look at what most of our backgrounds are, it comes from convenience retail, not food service retail. So our basis, our knowledge base, is entirely different. It's kind of like the difference between cash and accrual accounting. It's not that either one's wrong; they're just different, and it's understanding the difference first of all, and then, as both Brad and Mark said, putting the right people in the right place with the right skills. It's hard coming from where we are. And the first thing, it's like a 12-step program. The first thing is to recognize that you have a problem, and then address it. It's a step-by-step solution.
So guys, company competence we've talked about was a factor here. Is there a point where you decide your competence isn't in food service at all and you just abandon it? Or do you bring in the talent to try to change your competence?
Absolutely, there's a time. If you're unwilling to do the right things, to try and embrace food service when you're not prepared to, is a recipe for failure. And I oftentimes will consult with my clients and say, just don't do it. It's better to do some things well than to go into an area and offer mediocre food to your customers, which is just going to chase them away.
I'll answer that a little bit differently, and I agree with what Mike said. But in this idea of brand portfolio management, I think depending on the people and the location, one of the things you could do is dial it back and just put in a very, minimal kind of a program with fountain coffee and maybe a roller grill, which a lot of the industry does, and you're not getting too deep into the weeds with complexities related to on-site preparation and, full kitchen management, employees, and all that kind of stuff. And then the franchise route, I know we've had some successful operators that have leased part of their store out to an outside operator that came in and managed the QSR in their space and brought a lot of traffic into their store. That's another option.
So Brad, to follow on that, some people go with branded food programs, others develop their own proprietary brand. Why do people choose one path over another, and what are the respective advantages of each?
Well, I think there's, again, I look at that in three buckets, franchise, proprietary, and manufacturer brands. A lot of people will do just what we just discussed. They may not have an appetite for complex programs, and so they'll go into it a little light with proprietary coffee maybe, and then, branded fountain with Pepsi and Coke and that kind of thing. And then maybe a Johnsonville or a ballpark hot dog roller grill program that, the responsibility is there's still food safety issues, but it's not nearly as complex. But as people evolve and get more advanced, and I think realize the margin potential and the way to identify your brand of your store is really hinged on food service, then they want to get into it deeper and they want to evolve, whether it's through buying a franchise or developing their own program. They need to investment spend, all those things I went through that you need to be prepared to do to be successful at it. And I think it's sort of an evolutionary thing, or people go outside and hire people to bring them in to do it.
To tag on to that, Jed, it really does get back to that competency. If you don't have the competency to do your own proprietary, you might need that training that a franchise gives you to get you up to speed. But understanding and matching up the competency to the opportunity is what's important. And I think in the initial exploration, when you look at an opportunity, whether you use a site study company or whatever, I would look at, okay, what's my sales projections with proprietary food service versus franchise food service, and look at the options. And that might help you make the decision whether you want to go all in or not. And so then you choose one or the other or both, which some of my examples showed where they actually decided to go with a franchise program and their own proprietary program to fill the gaps. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. Sometimes it's both.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So is there a way to measure what kind of lift in sales or gross margin that one providing a program would provide to my bottom line? get a
this
sense
is Mark.
of profitability? Yeah.
Yeah. There definitely is. I mean, we have there's tools today that are going to be able to tell you exactly down to the item per day what you're making on each of those items, what you put into it, and what you're getting out of it. You go back 10 years ago, and there really wasn't a lot to do that, especially if you were doing something in-house and putting it together using, let's say there's multiple pieces to it. But that foundational piece I spoke about was the recipe management really helps you. Hey, here's the packaging. Here's what goes into this labor-wise, what goes into this item ingredient-wise, and the costs that are involved. And then it's watching that margin for you. And as long as you can see what you're throwing away and what you're selling versus what you're producing, you get a very clear picture and can see that impact on your bottom line. And then, as I mentioned before, fine-tune it and fine-tune it and fine-tune it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a broad range of performance metrics, and it really has to do with the scale that you go in at and the commitment, the quality, location, parameters all weigh in on the performance metrics. But obviously the industry's evolved. If you look at the statistics on where food service has come from and where it's going, the industry continues as a whole to investment spend and grow food service. And I think the QSR segment has certainly looked at C-stores as a competitive threat. And it's because there's just so many of us that have gotten into it and are doing it and doing it well.
Yeah, to the extent that other channels are viewing C-stores as a competitive threat, it seems like we're in the middle of a paradigm shift as convenience store operators, from needing to evolve from having a convenience food service mindset to a restaurant food service mindset. Can you comment on that paradigm shift? Do you see that taking place? And if so, how should we evolve?
If your marketing is customer based, then it's pretty obvious what these next generations want. The days of Snickers and Fritos are gone. And I constantly challenge people to look at, when you look at the shelves in the middle and the total sales out of that area, it's not as big as everyone thinks, and yet we still dedicate a huge amount of space. The millennials want something fresh. They want something that's perceived high quality. They want organic. And frankly, even us old people, and I'm just saying for myself, we're kind of nodding our head and saying, yeah, we want that too. They're just more vocal than we are. So if you're really listening to your customers, you have to embrace this next generation. But the one thing that we haven't really talked about is, I think technology has given us a leg up to be able to do more. And I think Brad and Mark are more qualified than me to talk about this. But when you look at some of the technology in the oven systems and the food prep systems, people that got away from food service 10 years ago and couldn't figure out how to make money, you know what? It's an entirely different deal today. And I think they need to relook at it and embrace it again with all the changes.
That's a good point, Mike. And, Mark and Brad, I know that's kind of your sweet spot, the technology and the execution side. Invite you to weigh in with your thoughts on how people can use technology or what's available that can help people execute their programs.
Well, I think that, yeah, there definitely is a lot of evolution in the systems that are available today to be able to help put in a food service program and maintain it profitably. From being able to know what to order to what to make when, and control production if you had, as a central user, and to take things from a chef's conceptual image of what should be put out into the store and being able to carry that to the store. Leaps and bounds have been made in those areas. And then, simply put, if you think about at your stores today and the technology available, most of these things are browser or app-based. So it's not too hard to carry and give everyone shared information instantly. So as you sell one, you can replenish one. Not that you would want to do that, but you can control these things in ways that you couldn't yesterday.
I'm going to go back to the previous question you asked and tie it into the technology part too. And that this idea of becoming more like restaurants in the coffee category, as an example, over the years, I've had a lot of retailers ask us if we could design a coffee program that would be more like Starbucks. And my response to them would typically be, then let's design a Starbucks. I mean, we can identify the elements. And as you start peeling back the onion, you start talking about things like ambiance and music and pendant lights and social cause and all the things Starbucks stands for. They're like, well, I don't really want to do that. I just want to look like that. And then you're not really going to be like that if you don't do it. We've done some research where we've identified a lot of those elements, and things that you don't think about, like Wi-Fi, come into play, and that's an important thing for millennials. And that's one technology component. Some of the espresso equipment now with super automated espresso. I was at the restaurant show, last month, and I saw a cappuccino machine that would talk to the point of sale system and tell the cashier what drink just got poured, so they didn't undercharge for a regular cup of coffee for someone they've got a mocha latte with a bunch of extra stuff added to it. So the technology, and it would tell them when the milk was low and that kind of thing. So, and that's the kind of stuff convenience store operators need to help facilitate, fewer people in the store and being able to respond to needing to refill, not just finished product, but ingredients in manufacturing food as well.
To tie into what Brad's talking about, just in a coffee alone, the biggest trend in coffee today is bean to cup. It's a way to not only increase the quality, but increase the number of cups and reduce the waste all at the same time. I mean, if you, all the accountants in the group, their eyes are spinning when you throw those three things all together. It's a beautiful thing. Well, that's all because of new technology. But what it does, when you have a paradigm shift, you have to get back to the core basics of design, layout, flow, and really think of how is this new customer now going to be reacting within the retail space. So technology is great. You got to use it, but you also got to understand it.
Mm-hmm. From a people standpoint, or just overall structure, how do you see the best operators structuring their company to support food?
From my vantage point, they have a dedicated senior executive that it's overseeing food service, whether that's a director of food service or vice president of food service. And then they build, a lot of times, their own team. Below them, they may have a QSR. Larger chains have more departments, obviously, but a QSR manager, a proprietary manager, and maybe a food manufacturer brand manager in that portfolio. And then there could be food safety specialists, training programs. I'll mention one, I won't mention their name, but a chain that I know of that I talked to recently, about 300 locations, but they're spending about $300,000 a year in training programs. And they take it real seriously. They're all proprietary brands, but they want to compete with the QSRs, and they feel like in order to do that, they have to really invest and spend. And they have a director of training, and they have field marketing employees, and they have field operation employees, all dedicated to food service. And then, of course, you have your convenience store operations team and the store management group, and they need to buy in and embrace food service passionately as well.
I think that's a great structure. I'm going to take it one step further and get back to one of my 3 C's, and that's competency. Understanding the competency of the people that you hire or the people that are already within your organization. And understanding that frankly, some of them are never going to be good food service people. And you know what? That's a hard thing sometimes when you like Joe, but Joe can't do food service, so you've got to move him out and put someone else in that position. So it's an entirely new thing. You've got to embrace that. You've got to understand that. But the structure that Brad outlined, I think, is very good. But it's kind of like the Southwest Airlines model. You can't train some things. You can't train attitude, but you can train the nuts and bolts. But you can't change who the person is.
No, both spot on, and we see this all the time with projects at ADC. Is that we centrally say that the project lives and dies by the ability to convey the information effectively to the team. And so the team is definitely part of this whole infrastructure that needs to change, as well as, hey, we want to go after food. Well, then you're going to need food people. You're going to need people that understand food and do it. And then you need to understand one thing. What is that one thing you're going to do better than the guy next to you? And that sometimes gets lost. We want to do everything. And it's focused on what you're going to do better than the person next to you and how you're going to execute and where you want to be when you're finished with the project, and then work backwards to whom you have to have, what equipment, what solutions all need to be in place.
Makes sense. Along that lines, Mark, as we're talking about people and structure, and as well as shrink, which is a big part of your area, one person asked that they preach to their staff all the time that shrink comes from more than just waste. It also comes from carelessness and prep, theft, and not checking on deliveries correctly. Is there any other factor that you would recommend watching to improve shrink?
Yes, I mean there are many different forms of waste or shrink, and you need to clearly define that, obviously, in your four walls. But the processing of fresh foods into prepared foods often incurs a loss, and that's just the loss of producing that item or yield. A lot of retailers kind of overlook that, but at the end of the day, you need to understand that, because that has impacts on what you order and how you order. So we see a lot of waste incurred as we start to roll food service programs out or beef them up by people who are over ordering in prepared foods or fresh foods, and they're sitting in the back room. They do go bad. So to kind of stop that systemic issue and that in shrink, which we call that vacuum shrink, a lot of the time that you have to kind of start at the tip of the iceberg and work your way down to figure out where the problem started and then where it ends up, because bad ordering could be on the back end of just not having systems in place and having people that aren't trained.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Food safety is a big component, but probably the foundation of a lot of our programs out there. Do you agree that food safety should be the foundation? And how do we make sure people trust us and our products?
Well,
there's not very many industries where people are manufacturing products that people are going to ingest. And so, I mean, the foundation of any good sanitation training program is going to put that burden on the operator and the employee. And as both Mike and Mark have said, if you don't have employees passionate about doing that correctly, you can actually not only get somebody sick, but you can kill somebody. I mean, it's a serious responsibility. And though I said, that your food service brand portfolio can define your image as a C-store operator, an outbreak of foodborne illness or a death can ruin a brand reputation and the name. You look at Chipotle and Jack in the Box from years ago, and it's not hard to find examples of that happening. So it's absolutely critical base of the food service pyramid of training, I think.
And then making sure you kind of to take that further, backfill with the right tools to make sure that compliance is being adhered to, and that you've given the right tools to the associates assembling things, and so that they do know, hey, this is how you properly prepare food, how it should be stored. So the transfer of information, again, that is a new discipline for a lot of C-stores to take, that next step, but it's one that should not be taken lightly, because it will destroy your brand in a heartbeat.
Another thing I'll add that's kind of new to this area is supply chain accountability for tracking food origin and what distribution centers did it come through, and being able to track your delivered products back to their point of origin. And so if you do have an outbreak, you can understand what happened and where it came from.
So quickly back to the people side in terms of structure. So if you got a large organization with separate food service and say C-store operations, do you see people separate out food service from C-store? So like C-store operations people report to C-store folks and food service operations people report to food service folks, or does it all run to one person at the end of the day?
It's got to be a pretty special person to be able to run both. And I think more and more we're seeing it separate. If I can jump back on the last question also, Jed, from a design standpoint, what I've seen historically is a lot of people taking shortcuts in how they handle the food. For example, people using their walk-in cooler for their food service. Well, to me, that's a huge no-no, because you've got great fluctuation of temperature, and you've got, commingling with, things that are being served out the cooler and things that are being held for food service. Shortcutting in the types of sinks and the amount of sinks, just all kinds of things that you would never do if you were doing McDonald's or another restaurant, but somehow we think we can shortcut it and take that, look for that easy button or that easy way out. So you can't take the shortcuts, and that's where you have to have that paradigm shift in thought process from a design standpoint. And I think, to your latest question, I think you also have to look at it from a competency standpoint of that individual within the store. Food service is one way, and convenience is another. They're very different.
Yeah, Jed, I'd say that I've seen the same thing. I've certainly worked with organizations that have both, where food service is reporting up into operations, C-store operations, but the trend is definitely toward a more kind of parallel vertical integration up to upper level management and food service dedicated. That's definitely a trend.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that, and the kind of bringing like mini, making C-stores into a mini grocery store in a lot of ways. Grocery, you would definitely have those two roles separated, rolling up to a vice president of fresh, and then going down to regional folks and down to store folks, with operations kind of bleeding over into the store personnel as well.
All right. Well, terrific. We're a couple minutes past the top of the hour, guys. So I'm just going to leave us with one last question here, and if you could provide just a short answer. How do we make what we do special relative to our competition on the food side?
This is Brad. I'd say provide value, and that's quality divided by price, day in and day out, on a consistent basis with people that are passionate about food service.
I couldn't agree anymore, and I think the way that you achieve that isn't by taking shortcuts. It's by, looking at what your end goal is and backing into what systems you need, what people need to be there, and what equipment needs to be put in place. And there just aren't shortcuts to making it a successful and dynamic solution.
And I'm going to tag on to that. Once you get all the functional elements done, it's what is the experience that you're giving that customer, and that's where not only making it pretty, but what are the offerings that you're doing to make them go home and say, boy, that was a good experience. Sometimes it's as simple as a clean restroom, but sometimes it's an outdoor seating park or a dog park, or music going throughout, or the way you separate the food service from the grocery. And there's so many things that go into what is that customer experience. And that's how you separate yourself from any of your competitors, is you improve on the customer experience and you make it your own with your personality, whatever that corporate company personality is, and you apply that to the retail space.
Mike, Brad, Mark, thank you so much for all the insight you provided and ideas. I know there were a lot of questions. I tried to get to many of them, but there were many we couldn't get to. So you have their contact information there. Feel free to shoot them any questions you have. I know they'd be more than happy to follow up with you on a one-on-one basis. And just want to thank the three of them for participating, and you as the audience member for taking your time as well. I will